Hello guys, this is my second video devoted to Grandmother. In the previous video I showed you how to change Grandmother parameters using Ableton Live, but we may use it not only as a utility that makes our workflow with Grandmother easier, but we may use it as a creative tool that expands Grandmother possibilities greatly. Okay, no more intro words, let's begin. I'm sure it's not a secret for you that Ableton Live has built-in modulators like LFO, envelope generator, shapers, and so on and so forth. And now we will try to use them to modulate the parameters that are presented on these MIDI controls panels. The first thing I should mention is the following. You know that some modulators can be found in audio effects like LFO, envelope generator, shaper. But we use MIDI track to control our Grandmother, and you see the output of this track is also MIDI. If we drop LFO from audio effects, you see now the output of our MIDI track turns into audio output. And in this case, these controls won't send any messages to Grandmother. So we can't use LFO or other modulators from audio effects. We must use modulators from MIDI effects. So here we have envelope MIDI, we can find MaxForLive, MIDI effects, LFO MIDI, and so on and so forth. So this is the first rule you should follow. Now let's try to use this LFO MIDI with our Grandmother. Here how it looks like. We can set rate, depth of the modulation, offset, to control the range where this modulation works. And there are some additional parameters. Let's assign this LFO to our frequency. And with this simple modulation, we can do our first steps into pairing Ableton Live, MaxForLive, and Grandmother. So this sounds not really interesting, but if we turn on sync, we can now get this moving, evolving timbre. Let's slow down the LFO. And you see the range where this LFO works is below the center. And we can set with the offset the range where the LFO will work. So if you want to modulate just the second half of this knob, use this offset. There's an interesting option on this LFO, is jitter. I'm not sure it can be found quite frequently on other LFOs. What it does, it adds some kind of jittering effect. You see these small, quick additional movements appear. And you can do these freaky and crazy sounds. Also, we may sync this LFO with our tempo. Let's make the rate like this. And we can change the shape of our LFO. Also, if we want nice and synced work with the LFO, we should turn on retrigger, so each time it's gonna start from the same position. I've got a simple MIDI track with these notes. Let's hear how it sounds. Do you hear it's kind of out of sync? This is because the LFO phase is set to the center, but if we shift it to the minimum position, now this LFO starts from the very low position of the saw up waveform. Let's try it with some drums. So with these first simple settings, you may create this screaming lead that is synced to your project, to your tempo, to your beat. This is impossible to do with the LFO built-in Grandmother because it can't be synced with the external clock via USB or MIDI, so we use the external LFO to create this effect. Let's try another thing with the LFO. Let's put it here. We choose square waveform, sync, let it be like this, and assign it to frequency of the oscillator 2. And let's try to change the shape of our LFO with this smooth knob. What else interesting we can do here? We'll put another LFO and we will modulate the depth of this LFO with the second one. Let's map to the depth, choose the rate. Let's add some reverb, delay. Here the message is the following. We may use this LFO MIDI not only to control Grandmother parameters, but we may use this LFO MIDI to control the LFO that controls our Grandmother. So you may add in a row several instances of this LFO and do parallel or serial modulations. Serial, I mean that LFO modulates another LFO, or parallel, I mean that several LFOs may control several different parameters of our Grandmother. Okay, let's try to modulate some different parameters. At the moment we used only this knob, and let's see what else we can do. This first MIDI control device has oscillator 1 and 2 octave selector, and let's try to modulate them. We'll put LFO here, let's turn it in sync mode and map to oscillator 1 octave. Let's make a copy of this LFO and assign it to oscillator 2 octave. Let's make some changes like this. Let's hear how it sounds. And we may compare the results before and after by turning on and off these two LFOs. Very simple sound. And now it's rhythmically evolving, moving. We may change. Let's add some drums. And the effects. So these two knobs are also an interesting destination for modulation, because we can change them rhythmically, and you've just heard that the tempo can be quite evolving and moving. Also, you may play with the rate of the LFO, shape, phases, and so on and so forth. You can get different results and the colors of this rhythm. We are still on our first device control. We are still on oscillators. What else we have here? Modulation amount, that is ModWheel, and the modulation rate, this knob. And of course we can modulate them as well. And we will do it now with the envelope. It can be found here, MIDI effect, envelope MIDI. And here we can set regular ADSR parameters, like this, and assign it to any parameter. We'll start with mod amount. There's an important thing when you work with envelope MIDI. You should turn on ARM on the MIDI track you're working with, because if it's not armed, let's turn it off. you see the envelope doesn't get a trigger signal and it doesn't work. So we must turn this on. I'll turn off local control not to get double signal, because if it's on, it's not clearly heard right now, but believe me, if the arm is on and the local control is on, your Grandmother engine gets two signals. The first one directly from your keyboard and the second one with the delay from your Ableton Live. We don't want it now, so I turn off local control to trigger Grandmother with Ableton only. And you see, now our envelope works. Now let's make some changes to hear its work clearly. You already hear that it works. You can also see how this knob raises and falls. You can also set the shape of the ADSR with these slopes. Let's turn the waveform to pulse and add pulse with modulation. Let's add some reverb and delays. We can change the waveform of the modulation. Of course, you can do this trick manually if you always control ModWheel with your hands. But in this case, your hands are free and you can play with your two hands some difficult parts, or you can play with one hand and use your second free hand now to control some parameters and play with the Grandmother. Also pay attention to this velocity button. If it's on, the amount of the modulation reacts on your performance. Let's compare. I'll try to push very gently. And you hear there's almost no modulation. And now I'll hit it harder. And you see how the envelope reacts on the velocity. Again, this is impossible to do with Grandmother. Let's add another modulation. We may use same envelope to control different parameters. We can open this window and here we can map up to 8 parameters, and each of these parameters has individual range for minimum and maximum. We're gonna map this second parameter to mod rate. Now let's set the range of this modulation. We may hear and we may look at this knob. This will help us to make these settings. So this is a starting point and this is the maximum point. So you need some time to play with envelope parameters and the range of the modulation to get the result you want. And this is a classical modulation when you control the LFO rate with the envelope, when it slows down or accelerates. And you can use envelope MIDI to create this timbre. Let's add another envelope on this track and map it to Oscillator 2 frequency. Let's make some changes. So I've got the envelope like this. Let's hear how it sounds. So this creates this pitch drop effect. We may also set sustain and set it to a center. So when we hold a key, the tune of the Oscillator 2 is set to its center position. Or we can drop it to its low position and turn on a sync. We can try different settings, for example, just a drop with the decay. Let's try it without sync. So now this timbre is kind of a fix, but if we turn on sync, it turns into a lead. The next thing we're going to explore is our second MIDI control panel that is devoted to arpeggio and sequencer. Let's turn it on. I've also prepared a MIDI clip in advance. Sounds like this, quite simple. But with the effects a bit more beautiful. Let's try our MIDI LFO to modulate the parameters from arpeggio section. We'll start with the direction. You know that the arpeggio and sequencer have three directions: the order, forward, backwards, and the random. And this knob controls these three states. Let's make it slower. Without it. With it. And this very first modulation, LFO to direction, gives us a kind of generative style arpeggio, because its behavior gets less and less predictable due to modulation of this controller, and we get this controlled chaos. Again, of course, you could do it manually with your hand, but again, when it's automated, your hands are free now to play with the parameters. Let's also add another LFO, but to octave selector now. So we have a range selector here, 1 octave, 2 and 3. And again, we can modulate this selector. Let's make it a bit different from the first LFO. In this modulation, LFO to octave selector is kind of the next layer if we want to make unpredictable, random, generative arpeggios. Next is my favorite, LFO to gate. Let's hear it. Without it. So the sound is kind of static from the point of view the length of the notes. But with this modulation, the length of each note is different, and this sounds very dynamically. We of course can change the depth of the modulation if you don't want your gate to be opened 100%. And so on and so forth. Also, we may add another modulation that will make our arpeggio even more interesting. Let's copy it. And now we assign this LFO to legato glide on and off. What this modulation will do, in real time it automatically turn and off legato glide time, and as a result some notes will be glided and other notes won't be glided. Let's hear how it sounds. We should change the glide time, of course. So you hear half of the notes are glided and others are not. This is also an interesting effect. Again, it will be difficult to do from the front panel because you need your two hands. One should hold shift and the other one constantly turn on and off this glide. But again, we want our hands to be free to play with the parameters. Another interesting story is the following. We can modulate this play button. We can automatically turn it on and off. But now we won't do it with the LFO, we can do it with the modulation or automation lanes. I've also prepared these automation lanes in advance, so here how it looks like. And this lane modulates this play button. So when the lane in its upper position, the play button is on. But when it drops to the bottom half, the play button is off. Let's see how it works. The combination of this play button on and off and all the previous modulations we did give us great possibilities to create generative and random style arpeggios. Personally, I love them very much. Now let's play with grandmother parameters again. I've changed the automation lane so we can see now exactly where this position up and down, not to be confused with these middle positions. Let's play. So we've just worked with arpeggio and we get this interesting generative style performance. But Grandmother has also a sequencer and we can do interesting things with this as well. What is special in our setup, our modulations and the sequencer of the Grandmother? Interesting is the following. When we are in a sequencer mode, our octave selector from arpeggio now turns into sequencer selector, and we can record and play 3 sequences and change the selection with our MaxForLive modulation. we already have this modulation on this knob, you see. Previously it modulated the octave of the arpeggiator 1, 2 or 3 octaves, but now it automatically selects the sequence. Let's quickly record 3 simple sequences and then we will experiment with this modulation. So let's hear how they sound from Grandmother. And now imagine if this selector moved automatically, and now we will do this. Let's push play in Ableton Live and see what we have. So you hear and see the result may be very interesting and unpredictable. You have 3 sequences that are changed in a row, one by one. I've created 3 simple sequences to save time for this video, but you can spend more time to create complex sequences with ties, rests, accents and other things, and the results will be even more interesting. By this moment we have explored 2 types of the modulators, LFO and envelope generator. And let's move to another type of modulator, that is a sequencer. For this example I'm going to use the sequencer, it's called Seq8. It's created by the company MaxForLive and it may be found in the packs Stray for Cats. Let's turn it on. I've prepared a simple sequence, let's see how it sounds by now. And beside the notes you can add these values for each step, and then you can map this row of values to some parameter. In my case this will be Oscillator 2 frequency. Without this, so we're hearing now only Oscillator 2. Let's map it to its frequency. And together with Oscillator 1, they can create some intervals. So if the value is 50, it means that the frequency knob is in the middle. If it's on maximum 127, this means that the frequency knob is here. In my case it's +7 semitones. And we can do simple intervals with this modulation. Also we may modulate this frequency again with sync mode on. That's here. So we may use these values not only to create intervals between oscillator 1 and 2, but we may use them to create some timbral changes in the course of the steps. And of course you may set these values to any parameter that is included on these MIDI control panels. Let's play with some other parameters that are presented on this device. Smooth. It creates kind of glides with this knob. But let's turn sync on. We can add swing. We can change the rate. Let's try it with some beats. In this video I've showed you just a couple of scenarios out of dozens or hundreds. I used simplest LFO and envelope generator, and you've seen the results are already interesting. But I'm sure most of you know that there are many third-party MaxForLive devices that are way more complex, and the results may be even more exciting. You may find these devices on Ableton Live website, PAX, MaxForLive. Also, you may find on the internet other MaxForLive developers like K devices that have nice MIDI effects. Another one is Isotonic Studios, and they have plenty of devices, instruments, effects, MIDI effects, modulators. Or you may find many interesting devices on MaxForLive.com. Here's the website and then LFO. So you may see there are many devices, modulators, and you can assign them to Grandmother parameters. I hope you enjoyed the video and found some interesting tips and tricks, patch ideas that you can now use in your performances and tracks. Don't forget to check out this Ableton Live template with these MaxForLive MIDI controls, and please check out my presets for Grandmother. I hope you will like them as well. Please leave your comments, let me know if this type of videos is interesting and useful for you. Your feedback is very helpful. And that's all for today. See you in next videos. Goodbye.